Hello, and welcome to Up Close on METV. I'm Charles Clapsettle, Station Manager for Manatee Educational Television. And today on our program, we're very honored to have with us Representative Greg Steube of District 73. Representative Steube, thank you for joining us and taking the time out of, I'm sure, a very busy schedule to talk about some of the issues.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Representative Steube was first elected to the Florida House of Representatives in 2010 and has served the citizens of Manatee County as both Vice Chair of the Business and Professional Regulations Subcommittee and Vice Chair of the Health Innovation Subcommittee. He's also a member of the full Appropriations Committee, the Regulatory Affairs Subcommittee, and the Rulemaking Oversight and Repeal Committee. Representative Steube has sponsored numerous legislative bills to help improve the lives of his constituents, including House Bill 85, which encourages new economic development opportunities, House Bill 1077, which supports Florida's veterans organizations, and House Bill 1097, which is calling for increased safety in our schools. Now, Representative Steube is a tireless worker for the people of District 73, an Iraqi war veteran, and a dedicated community leader. Now, Representative Steube, you certainly have a lot on your plate doing all of these committee work, but this session is coming pretty quick. It's coming right up in September, starting a little bit earlier than usual. Is that correct?
Yeah, in the off-election years, we typically start our committee meetings a little early, and we already have our schedule out, which is a credit to our leadership to go ahead and put that information out. But we start in September this year. We'll have committee meetings every month, and then 2 committee meetings, week meetings in January, and then 3 in February, and then session starts in March. So it's kind of a quick turnaround. You getting over the summer and you're already kind of focusing on next year's legislative agenda, which is good. But
starting a little bit early can kind of help you in your preparation and you setting those goals for the upcoming session. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the challenges of a campaign year is you can't file a bill until after the election, and then so after November, you've got a very truncated committee schedule to try to get legislation through. Getting the opportunity to start in September gives us a little bit more time to work our bills through the committee process, which I think is great because it provides more time for feedback, more time for our constituents to get involved in what issues are important to them.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the last session if we could. I mean, this was a great session. The legislature put $1 billion more back into education, which was a significant thing, a boon to education from colleges all the way to pre-K. So it was a huge influx of dollars for education.
Yeah, we were very happy that we were able to do that. My first 2 years in the House, we had to cut $6 billion from our budget, which is tough to do, especially as a young legislator just getting used to the process. But being able to have a little bit of an uptick in the economy last year and having a little bit of extra money, we were able to put that extra $1 billion in education, which I think is important, and it shows that the legislature and the governor is very focused on making sure that the education in the state of Florida is where it needs to be.
And it's a critical thing. I think the governor has spoken on many occasions about why education is such a critical part of workforce development and across the board. But last year, you sponsored 6 bills. Was that correct?
Every year so far I've done 6, which some members don't do the full amount, but in the House we're limited to our 6 bills, in the Senate they can sponsor as many as they want, but I did file 6 last year.
And 3 of those bills that you sponsored were passed and were enacted, and most recently in, I believe it was Miami, the Governor Scott signed the most recent one, which was House Bill 85. And tell us about that and why you feel it was such a critical bill to get past this session.
Yeah, House Bill 85 was the public-private partnership bill, and the reason that I decided to sponsor that piece of legislation is the state of Florida doesn't have any statutory authority or any statute recognition of public-private partnerships and entering into those agreements in our state. And I think it's a great thing for basically everybody involved because the local government or the public entities have the opportunity to get infrastructure needs that they have at a much sooner time than they would if they were only using taxpayer dollars to do it. So it allows for the private influx of dollars into our state, and then it allows for the public entity to finance an infrastructure project much sooner than they otherwise would have been able to do. It creates jobs in our community by building these projects, and the taxpayer, at the end of the day, is not paying for the project that otherwise would have had to been fully paid by the public entity.
Well, recently you appeared before the Board of County Commissioners and used a perfect example of, say, the county wanted to build a parking garage. And the example I thought was great. There might be a need for a parking garage, but there might not be the dollars within the county to undertake that. So, but if they had a private firm that would undertake it, the terms and conditions are set by the county.
Correct. And so there was a lot of flexibility in the bill to allow every public entity, whether it's a college, a university, a city, a county, flexibility as to how they wanted to enter into these agreements. And at no time is that project the property of somebody else. It's still owned by that public entity. So that example of the parking garage, the county owns the project, but for whatever amount of years they want to enter into the agreement, say 20 to 30 years, that investor's paid back on the investment by putting those dollars up front, and we as taxpayers get a infrastructure project much sooner than we otherwise would have. So I was very happy that the governor, signed the bill. It passed in the Senate unanimously. We only had a few negative votes in the House. And for the governor, obviously, to take his time to have a bill signing ceremony in Miami for the bill shows you how important he also felt that it was for our state.
And it really was. I mean, it's part of I think the governor's emphasis on creating economic benefits. And I think that's one little discussion, because the governor and the legislature are really focused on creating great jobs and great opportunities for businesses within the state. And this P3, I think is called, is a great opportunity for that.
Absolutely. And I really think that you're going to see a lot of colleges and universities really utilize this type of infrastructure agreement to build infrastructure, because the PICO dollars in our state, which are the infrastructure dollars for capital improvement for universities and colleges, has been hit hard with the recession. So for entities like that to be able to take advantage of this, I think is going to be great.
And for some universities and colleges, it's a great opportunity. I mean, whether they see an aging library or a gymnasium or something, they can take advantage of that through private partnerships. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit, as a veteran, former Army officer who served. Veterans Affairs matters have always been close to your heart. I think during your first tenure in office, you sponsored a couple of bills that were targeted towards disabled veterans. Is that correct?
Every year, I try to do at least one bill specifically on veterans and Veterans Affairs. My first year, I did a bill creating a Wounded Warrior hunt areas. So we allowed these Wounded Warrior recreational activities to occur on state forest lands. And we created that in statute, and it's been actually a very, very successful program. I've heard from Wounded Warriors that have had the opportunity to go on these recreational activities together. And it's nice for them to be with other fellow colleagues that they served with, whether they were there at the same time or not. It gives them an opportunity to have some relaxation and some camaraderie with fellow members of the military that have also been wounded in combat. This past year, we did a veterans organizations bill. There was I've seen a real need where you have situations where people will raise money on behalf of the name of veterans and say that, well, we're raising money for veterans and veterans' family, and you don't really know if it's actually going to veterans or their families. And we did a bill this year that would specifically address veterans organizations, require that 51% or more of the amount that they raise has to go directly to the services that they say that they're providing. If they're not providing those services to veterans, it's a violation of the Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act. And we also made it a criminal offense if they were doing these type of things and then using the money for themselves. There was a great example in Jacksonville, and it actually occurred after I filed the legislation, the Allied Veterans scandal. They raised like $320 million, and only about $2 million of that actually went to veterans and their families. And so that bill that we passed and the governor signed would go directly to individuals like that who are using the name of veterans to raise money basically for themselves.
And to fill their own pocket. when that Allied Veterans thing hit the newspapers and television, people were shocked and dismayed. You know, that much money had been raised and little or nothing had been returned to the people that they've been raising. And I'm sure as a veteran yourself, knowing, you know, the sacrifice that, you know, veterans have made, you know, to trade on their name and dignity is really an affront.
And that's exactly why I did the bill. You know, and I can give local examples of driving around and seeing people in uniform raising money, and you don't really know if they're actually raising money for veterans or if they just went somewhere and purchased a uniform and just trying to raise money that way.
And those organizations do a great disservice to the many really fine organizations that do, you know, a yeoman's work each and every day, you know, for disabled veterans and veterans and their family. So this is a wonderful bill that really puts the stop to this kind of deceptive practices.
Right.
So, and that's a job well done on that. But one of the things, Representative, that really, you know, got a lot of press last year was your House Bill 1097, which was school safety. And we want to touch on this briefly because even though it had some support, it didn't pass. But there was a lot of discussion about this and a lot of misinformation. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about what the school safety legislation was that you wanted to see enacted?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Obviously, after the events that occurred in Connecticut and events that we've seen since then and throughout our country as it relates to school shootings, I felt like we needed to at least examine in the state of Florida if there was things that we needed to do to be proactive to ensure or prevent something like this from occurring in Florida. So when I started doing my research, I saw that most counties, and specifically here in Manatee and Sarasota County, none of our elementary schools have school resource officers there because of budget constraints.
And unfortunately, you know, that's the case. And it's not just Manatee, it's places throughout the state.
Most of the state, most of the research that I've seen, that's the case. The high schools have them, middle schools kind of share, but the elementary schools don't have them. And the way that our statutes are currently set up, I, as a concealed permit carrier holder, am prohibited from carrying a firearm on school grounds, period. There are 8 other states in our country that, prior to Sandy Hook, allow individuals who have a concealed permit carrier license to carry on school grounds. So what we started to look at is what could we do to ensure that there's somebody there that can react and protect our children in the circumstance of a crisis. And we didn't even go as far as opening it up to all concealed permit carrier holders because we didn't want to make it that broad. We wanted to have a very specific target to give people assurances that these people that would be possibly carrying would have the proper training and that would have the designation or approval from the principal on that school. So what we did was we created a bill that would allow, and it was permissive. So if the principal didn't feel comfortable designating anybody, they didn't have to. But if a principal did, especially your rural schools that are 30, 45 minutes away from downtown, that knew that they'd be 20, 30 minutes away from law enforcement, definitely wanted to take advantage of this. So it was permissive, and what it did is it allowed the principal of the school to designate an employee of the school during their time of employment to carry a concealed firearm during the time of school. But prior to designation, they were required to go through the exact same training that an armed security guard would be required to go through in our state statutes. And that's 40 hours of initial classroom training. I believe it's 36 hours initially of firearms training. And then every year they would have to do the 4 hours of firearms training a year.
To be recertified.
To be recertified. I believe, and I think it was a G and a C license, but I could be getting the letters off there. So we tried to make it to where there were some assurances on what the training would be. And then there was further assurances that the principal would have to designate this individual. And what better person to make that decision for their school, because the principal is going to know if they have a former Army officer that's now a teacher in the school that would be a great candidate to carry concealed during their time. And God forbid a tragedy would occur there, there would be somebody there that could be responsive. That could react.
And I think that was a critical thing, is that after, of course, the tragedy at Sandy Hook, people questioned a lot of security measures and mental health procedures and all of those things. But one of the things I think, and you've mentioned and you've talked about this, is the training and the accreditation that's really absolutely necessary to be responsive to that type of situation. And that's going to be part of the resubmission of this?
We're going to actually increase the amount of training. One of the great feedback that I got from the bill was that school resource officers every year go through 8 hours of active shooter training. So we're going to make that as a requirement as well, that whoever these people that would be possibly designated would have to go through that same amount of active shooter training that an SRO would have to go to. And I do want to point out another reason why I did the bill that is important. In 2001, the FBI with the Department of Education did a study. And in that study, they found that some of these incidences occurred in less than 6 minutes. More than half of these incidences occurred in less than 15 minutes. And the research also showed that the majority of these incidences were resolved by someone other than law enforcement. If you look at most counties, their response rate for just general crime is between 6 and 11 minutes. So if there's nobody there that's armed to be able to respond to an active shooter training, most of these instances will be done and over with before law enforcement gets there. Sandy Hook, it took them, I think it was 20 to 22 minutes to arrive on scene. And by then, the atrocities have occurred. If you have somebody there that has proper training to be able to react to a situation like that, I think is really, really important. And that was one of the reasons why, based on that research that was done, that we decided to move the bill forward.
Well, as this goes up into the legislative session, beginning next year, I really would think it would be important if you can come back and kind of update on what the progress of that is, because a lot of people think that by putting guns in the schoolyard creates an unsafe environment, creates a danger unto itself. But in actuality, it could be that very preventive measure that's really necessary for the protection of children.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we talked about when we did the bill. Is a lot of times, these folks that want to do these malicious things to our young people, they're going to a place where they know that there's nobody there to be able to react to them within a reasonable period of time. And so just the fact that we did the statute, whether the principal took advantage of it or not, that shooter who thinks that they're going to want to go and do this is not going to know if there's 10 people there that have been designated that can react to him as soon as he hits the door. So that was part of the other aspect to it that I think that's really important is, we live in a state where if you have a concealed carry permit, that you can carry just about anywhere. I mean, you can carry, with the exception of schools and courts and bars, you can carry just about anywhere. And I think these people target areas that they know that there's not anybody there to respond.
Well, I would say to you that if you're an individual that's intent on doing harm, you pretty much aren't going to go to a police station or you're going to a fire station. You're going to go to the place that where people are the most vulnerable, and that's with schools and shopping centers and those places where people do not expect such a heinous crime to be committed.
And I know anything with guns is controversial, and I think it's important to know too that, and I've said this before in the committee hearings when we discussed the bill, is you're never going to be able to prevent evil people from doing evil things. But let's not restrict law-abiding citizens' ability to defend ourselves, and even more, our children. Our children don't have that ability to defend themselves. And let's give our teachers or any employees at the schools at least a reasonable chance or an expectation to defend themselves if something like this would ever to occur.
Well, I look forward to seeing some updates, and hopefully you can bring back some information on how that bill is going to be progressing into the session. Now, as you move into session, there's some real critical things that are going to be on the legislation's plate this year, and chief among those is going to be Medicaid. Give us a kind of an update on what happened in the last session, and what do you foresee, and how do you think the progress is going to be in the next session?
Yeah, you had, our legislative process is you have a House, a Senate, and the governor, and all three people have to say yes on a particular, issue or bill for it to go through the process. And you had a situation this year on Medicaid where both of the chambers were in different positions and the governor was in a different position. The governor was saying that he was in support of the full expansion of Medicaid. The Senate took more of a in between the House and governor position and said, well, we'll expand some, but we don't want the full expansion. The House's position was that, one, we didn't want to expand Medicaid because of the liability on the citizens of the state of Florida would be unknown. Under Obamacare, it says that after the first 3 years, for the first 3 years, 90% of it's paid. Correct. Well, after that, it doesn't say what happens. So nobody knows. I mean, it could be 50% that they match, it could be zero that they match, and now we've created a liability for our taxpayers to have to fund a government-run program. So in the House, our idea was, let's give people a vested interest in their own health care. And Medicaid is a government-run program, and they can get better health care through private insurance. So let's put those people that are 100% to 138% of the poverty level, let's allow them to pay a little bit every month for health care and a real health insurance policy. So Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Aetna, whatever their provider is. $25 a month they pay for that. And they will get a real health insurance policy, and the rest of that would be subsidized through a program that we started in 2010, the Florida Healthy Choices program.
Florida Healthy Choice, or is it Florida Healthy Choices Family Program?
It's one of those.
It's one of those, but it's a wonderful program, and it was kind of like developed with specificity to reach out to those individuals and families that need health insurance. Right,
and we want to ensure that those people that really do need health insurance, and the single mother that's out there that's 100 to 138% of the poverty level and has 3 children, we're going to make sure that they're covered. But let's do it in a way that's responsible. Let's do it in a way that's not creating a liability on our taxpayers for time to come. I mean, if you look at the Medicaid budget, every year it increases.
Tell us what the Medicaid budget is for.
Well, our entire budget for the state of Florida is $74 billion. Last year it was $74 billion. And of that, approximately $20 billion of that is Medicaid. And every year that number increases without even expanding Medicaid. So if we expanded Medicaid, that number would go up dramatically. And this legislature is not a legislature that's going to raise taxes to pay for that. So if we expanded Medicaid, how are we as the state of Florida going to be able to meet that liability if we're not raising taxes? So that's the real crux of what happened last year and why nothing occurred. As we move forward into this next year, I do think you're going to see some conversations on it. I don't know where that's going to go. I think the House is very firm on the fact that we're not willing to expand Medicaid pursuant to Obamacare, and we want to put people on a plan that's really going to benefit them through private insurance.
And I think the Medicaid issue is going to be one of those critical things, because even though the administration now has kind of delayed implementation of the Affordable Health Care Act for employers, it's still going to roll in there, and there's still going to be emphasis on the Medicaid expansion.
Right.
So,
this is definitely not an issue that's going away.
Now, we're kind of winding down a little bit, and I want to touch base on a couple of things. Specifically, this is your second term in office, and within those terms that you've really increased kind of a visibility, and you've also, being the vice chair of 2 very powerful committees, sitting on the full appropriations committee, it's an awful lot of responsibility that has been given to you in those first 2 terms. But what do you see, some of those responsibilities leading to? What would you like to see on your horizon?
Well, politics is one of those things that timing is kind of everything, and you never know what's going to happen from one session to the other. I welcome the opportunity to serve my constituents however I can. I was very blessed to be able to get on the Appropriations Committee as a sophomore. There's not that many, usually that's reserved for your junior and senior members. And to be a part of that process that appropriates the state budget, I think is really important to one, get an understanding of that, and 2, to be able to come back and explain to the constituents in Manatee and Sarasota County why we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing it, so there's some accountability to the taxpayers.
And I think it's a critical thing. I would say to you that our legislation delegation is a great group of people. Representative Jim Boyd, Senator Galvano. It's a very unique and forward-thinking collection of individuals. How does the delegation work together?
I think we have an excellent delegation, and Representative Boyd and I talk on a fairly regular basis about issues and things that are going on. And I think one of the other really good things is that we all serve on very different committees, which is great for our area. So if you have, an issue as it relates to the ethics and campaign reform, Boyd chaired that. If you have an issue as it relates to education funding, Galvano's the chair of all the education funding in the Senate. So it's great to have people that sit in certain areas on committees and have certain experience backgrounds, that if there's an issue, if there's an issue related to insurance, I always send them to Representative Boyd because that's his background. And I rely upon him for advice on certain issues that I don't have experience in. And that's one of the great things about our delegation and working together and having people with diverse background sets to serve the people of the state of Florida.
Well, and it's got to be a great benefit for the constituents of Manatee and Sarasota County.
Absolutely.
To have a delegation with diverse backgrounds and diverse interests and diverse committees that they're serving under. It's a wide-ranging capability.
Absolutely.
So as you move into September, which is just a few weeks away, what kind of preparation do you do to get ready for the session?
We've already, as we talked about the school safety bill, I already have that in drafting with some changes that we wanted to make from last year. I have a couple other bills in drafting. So my plan, because we have more time this year to really try to get things through the committee process, we're already filing bills. We're already looking as to what we're going to do next year. My goal is to have most of those bills filed before we start in September, at least a good chunk of my bill slots. That way we can start working them through the committee process.
Well, Representative Steube, I must say that the two bills that you brought to fruition, the P3, the public-private partnership program, and also the fraudulent veterans organization bill, are two bills that really did a great thing, not only for this community, but for the state of Florida. And hopefully when you can come back, perhaps before session starts up, give us an update on where we're going.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you.
And if people want to find out or get in touch with you or have a question or a comment, how can they do that?
Everything, you can pretty much Google our name, and then on the state website you can get all the contact information for our legislative office.
And we put it up on the screen now, so if people want to call, they can go to your website or to your phone number.
They can go to www.myfloridahouse.gov. They can email me at greg.steube@myfloridahouse.gov, and anytime a constituent or anybody contacts our office, we always respond to any inquiries that they have. So I would encourage people to take advantage of that.
And I'm sure they will. Representative Steube, thank you for taking time out of a busy schedule and coming here and talking a little bit about it and kind of focusing on some of the key things that are very important to this community and to the state as well.
Thank you very much
and
for having me. I appreciate
we'd welcome you back at any time. If you want to do an update or talk about a specific area of interest, we'd welcome you back at any time.
Yeah, that would be great.
Right. And thank you for joining us on this very special edition of Up Close on METV.